The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Since Austin, deep in the heart of fossil-fueled Texas, is the only place I've ever called home, I don't believe I've ever been in a home without a gas stove. But I certainly don't need any protection through this contrived bill, and neither does any other American. I don't need to save my stove because there's no federal bureaucrat out there about to turn off the burners and mandate cold meals forever. You know, after meddling in our bedrooms and in our bathrooms as if that weren't enough, now Republicans are turning their attention to our kitchens. Republicans propose in these bills to stop regulations that no agency has ever proposed. It follows the Republican playbook. The easiest problems to fix are those that don't exist in the first place, and they're very good at that. Pursuing this manufactured problem places this bill in the race for the silliest Republican bill of the year. But with culture warriors developing this kind of stuff all the time, that is an honor that is very competitive to get. Nonsense like these bills represent just another way of avoiding dealing with the genuine problems that our families and our country confront. There is a growing body of science that indicates that burning natural gas increases the chances of childhood asthma, can worsen pre-existing heart and lung issues, and using gas in the home, of course, like using it anywhere else, can involve methane leaks that are important as we deal with the climate crisis. This bill prohibits any consideration of science in the future, no matter what it shows or what improvements might be recommended for health and safety of those who are cooking on a stove or their families. Unfortunately, rejection of science is to be expected from a crowd of climate deniers who regularly prefer political mythology and ideology over reality. What we should be all concerned about is not how we're cooking on our stoves, but how our planet is cooking. It's overheating to a dangerous level. This bill is yet another indication of Republicans' rejection of science. Our families are already encountering the human health effects of climate change, tropical diseases we've never seen before, heat exhaustion, death and destruction from one disaster after another. And when Democrats pursue solutions to these problems, House Republicans are quick to point, look over there at this imagined Fox network fantasy that can upset you, while meanwhile they seem to have never met a polluter they didn't like or to whom they were unwilling to grant special privileges. More and more families are in fact going electric with their cars, their water heaters, their solar panels, and more. And at some point I expect my family also will make the change with our stove. Not because we're being forced by a bureaucrat, but because science shows that it may be healthier for our grandchildren and for our planet. Indeed, in January, the American Public Health Association called on federal agencies to do more to educate the public about these dangers. And more research is exactly what we need, including from the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the Department of Energy, so we can base what we do here on facts, not on fantasy. I yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
One of the arguments made from the other side of the aisle that I find absolutely laughable is this notion that the REINS Act might be unconstitutional. It might have some constitutional infirmity because it requires Congress to pass the laws instead of the executive branch. And they reference a Supreme Court decision, INS versus Chadha, that doesn't even read on this bill. This bill does not violate the presentment clause, the REINS Act does not, because it requires passage in the House, passage in the Senate, and a signature of the president. It doesn't even apply to the Supreme Court Act that was referenced, or the Supreme Court decision that was referenced. And now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank the Speaker. I thank my friend from Kentucky. He's completely correct. The only constitutional infirmity is the extent to which we are allowing bureaucrats to make up the law and make up policies without being checked by the branch represented by the people in this body and in the Senate to check them under our Constitution. That is the constitutional infirmity. And to my friend from Texas, who was regaling us on the absurdity, apparently, of our desire to protect the American people from the regulatory state clamping down on their ability to choose how they want to live and have the energy of their choice, which is it? The gentleman from Texas sat down in the well and he was trying to say, no, we're not trying to ban this. We're not going to do anything about that. When, by the way, the administration literally said, ban stoves. It was a literal quote. And I think when they say something, you should actually believe them. But then the gentleman from Texas went on to say, hey, they want to protect all manners of pollution. We want to stop the scourge of global warming. Well, which is it? Are we banning stoves in pursuit of unicorn energy theory, or are we actually going to allow the American people to be free? The reality is my friend from Texas gave up the joke. Everybody gets it. Everybody knows it. We know exactly where our Democratic colleagues are. They do want to ban the internal combustion engine. They've effectively said so. They do want to get rid of the burning of fossil fuels. They do want to make your energy more expensive for the American people. They literally say so. That is the truth. And the fact is, it's not just energy. We've got the REINS Act trying to restrict the power of the executive branch so we can stop things like a $500 billion student loan bailout, which Nancy Pelosi said the president, quote, does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. We want to force schools to allow biological men to compete in women's sports under Title IX. Well, we have an amendment to address that. Force 10.4 million healthcare workers to take a COVID jab or lose their job. Use taxpayer dollars to provide abortions at the VA. Unilaterally turn potentially millions of Americans into felons overnight for owning a piece of plastic attached to a constitutionally protected gun. Use the EPA to regulate gas and coal-fired power plants out of existence. And yes, for the Department of Energy to tell you what type of gas stove you can and can't buy. We get the joke. The REINS Act is necessary, and I support it. But I got to use my last 30 seconds to say this. It is ironic that we are voting on the REINS Act just 1 week after Republicans gave up our debt ceiling leverage to actually get it signed into law. That is precisely how the swamp works, ladies and gentlemen. The REINS Act was in our good bill, Limit, Save, Grow, in April, and we walked away from it last week. Walked directly away from it to cut a deal. And we shouldn't have, instead of engaging in theater where we're going to send it to the Senate for it to die. We should be serious about forcing votes to get it done in this body. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit a document for the record entitled Gas Stove Use and Respiratory Health Among Adults with Asthma, and the conclusions of which, among adults with asthma, there was no apparent impact